Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 of Biochemistry Literacy for Kids. In this lesson, we will be examining and learning about hydrogen-containing molecules, simple molecules that contain hydrogen. Before we get started with learning about some new molecules, we're going to do a quick review of how to read formulas. So the first lesson had some formulas in it. We're just going to make sure that the students understand what's meant by these formulas. So here are some formulas of molecules that we'll be building and learning about in this particular lesson. When we look at these formulas, CH4, for example, what does it actually mean? It means that there's one carbon with 4 hydrogens bound to it. When we don't see a subscript next to a letter, we assume that there's only one of those elements. NH3, that's ammonia, means that there's one nitrogen in this molecule. H2O is a little bit tricky. If you follow the rule, you'll get it right, though. How many oxygens are there? It's not 2 oxygens. It's only 1 oxygen, because the subscript following the letter is or the lack of a subscript in the case of the oxygen, tells us how many of those atoms there are. H2O can be tricky for students because they are trying to figure out why is the hydrogen in the front, whereas in most other molecules, the hydrogen is in the back. From what I can tell, this is just a tradition. There's really no scientific reason for why it's written this way. You can actually write it the other way, and a chemist would understand what it means. You could write OH2, and you do see that. Sometimes chemists will write that just kind of in passing. So there's really no difference there. Next molecule, C2H6O, what does it mean? It means that there's 1 oxygen in this molecule, ethanol, which we'll be studying later. This is just kind of a fun one to do with the students. I make them kind of try to guess the formula for hemoglobin, right? So they have a familiarity with hemoglobin from the first lesson. They may be a little bit overwhelmed here. They may try to count up the hydrogens and the carbons here. They know the color coding. It's fun to kind of have them guess what the formula for this could be. Here's the big reveal moment for us here. This is the actual formula for hemoglobin. It's kind of the spectacular number of atoms, almost 10,000 atoms in this molecule. That's kind of gives us this idea of the grandiose scale of biochemistry, how biochemistry is really very different from chemistry. We're looking at structures on a kind of magnificent scale here, much more than you would study in a high school chemistry class. The one kind of cool takeaway we can do here is look at the iron number, right? So there's 4 irons in a hemoglobin molecule. So what does that mean? Let's peel away the other atoms that we don't really care about and look straight at the hemes, all right? So we're trying to figure out how many oxygens might a hemoglobin molecule bind. If there's 4 irons, means there must be 4 hemes. In the center of each heme, there's 1 iron. So what does that mean? There must be 1 O2 for every heme. So we have the ability to bind 4 O2 molecules in every hemoglobin molecule. So the purpose of hemoglobin, each molecule can bind 4 oxygen molecules. Those are the molecules that we breathe in through our lungs. So each hemoglobin molecule is carrying 4 hemes. It's carrying 4 hemes and also 4 oxygen molecules in our blood. So that's kind of a cool thing for students to connect with. All right, so now this is beginning the kind of main part of the lesson here. This lesson is a lot of building. So have the model kit out. Everything that we see in the lesson, with the exception of that hemoglobin, don't try to build that, but build all the small molecules we're doing here. And there's different ways of doing it. Sometimes you can have the students try to draw the molecule first, look at the formula, try to draw it. You may have some students may like to try to build the molecule first and then draw the structure. So it depends on what you want to do here. But I like to make them guess the structure in some way so that they're kind of thinking about it. Don't just show them the structures. Try to make them figure it out. The first one here we're going to do is methane, CH4. This is what you burn on your gas stove, right? So give them a minute to figure these out. Have them. What I usually do is I usually give them the model kit and have them try to figure it out, and they'll get methane pretty easily. Some of the others they may have to think a little bit more about. But that's your methane molecule. If you want, they can draw it first. If they're kind of confident and they don't need the models. Next one is ammonia. Give them a chance to draw it. They know those bonding rules, right, from the the periodic table lesson, so they know that carbon makes 4 bonds. They know that ammonia makes nitrogen makes 3 bonds. So they should be able to figure this out. There's only one way to make these molecules, H2O. The oxygen should have the ability to make 2 bonds. There's only one way to put this together to have it make any sense. HF, hydrofluoric acid. This molecule has only 1 bond in it because we know that hydrogen only makes 1 bond, fluorine only makes 1 bond, so there's only one way to make that molecule. If they are more of the model making type, then you can show them this structure and have them connect the written structure with the physical structure. What I've noticed is a lot of students, when you tell them to draw the structure, they'll actually try to draw a 3-dimensional picture of the molecule like you have here. Try to encourage them to draw in a chemical nomenclature way with letters and bonds. Try to have them not draw these shaded in structures because molecules are going to get way too complicated. We can't be drawing pictures of the model kits, all right? This is another cool opportunity to show them a combustion reaction. We had one in the first lesson. Since they have a methane made, they may have some leftover O2 molecules from the other lesson. Have them build 2 O2 molecules and have them try to burn their methane that they just created. Break some bonds, form some bonds. They can turn their methane and their 2 oxygens into a CO2 and 2 water molecules. This is kind of giving us a preview of the idea of stoichiometry, chemical reactions, combustion. Doesn't matter if they end up with some, by the way, to get this to be done right, you may have to use some more of the flexible bonds to have the CO2 come out right. So have them build a methane that has the long bonds with it, and then they can do this perfectly fine. This is giving them an idea of what is combustion, what is a chemical reaction. It's breaking and forming and breaking bonds. It's taking molecules that you start with, changing them into something else. Energy can be released in this process. So this is just a preview of some later concepts that they might study in high school chemistry or college chemistry. So while we're on the subject of carbon-based molecules, this is a nice opportunity to look at some longer chains of carbons, some molecules that are based on carbons and hydrogen. We already know methane. Let's look at a molecule that's 1 more carbon larger in size. The next one is ethane. Ethane is C2H6, a few more hydrogens, 1 extra carbon. This molecule is an industrial molecule, which we'll actually talk about later. The next hydrocarbon, 1 more carbon, is propane. You can have them look at the formula, try to figure out the structure, or look at the structure, figure out the formula from it. This is what you're burning in your barbecue grill. And then we have a longer chain hydrocarbons, which 4 carbons is called butane, C4H10. This is what's going on in a cigarette lighter. These are really, really common chemicals. They're actually part of other chemicals a lot of times. So knowing methane, ethane, propane, butane, it's a really, really helpful kind of set of vocabulary. So there's a kind of fun little mnemonic. I don't remember if I invented this mnemonic or not. Must eat peanut butter. This tells us the first letter of each of these hydrocarbons, methane, ethane, propane, butane. So this is a fun way for the kids to remember the names for these different carbon chains. The takeaway from here is that carbons like to bond with themselves. They form very stable structures with themselves. This is I said the basis of carbon-based life. Molecules that contain carbon tend to last very well. Hexane is a molecule that, not surprisingly, contains 6 carbons. This is a very common laboratory solvent. We can extend the chains even farther. We can look at octane. Octane has, of course, 8 carbons in a chain. If we look at the formula makes sense as well. Octane is part of gasoline. We'll talk actually quite a bit more about gasoline and what these octane numbers are about. That's in a later lesson. Have them build all these molecules, all right? If you have enough carbons, have them build an octane. Have them also improvise on this. Have them build branching hydrocarbons, molecules that have crossroads in them where it's not just a linear chain, maybe even cyclic molecules. We're going to talk about all these things later on, but it's cool to have them start to experiment and start to see what kind of molecules are possible. If the molecule has carbon-carbon bonds, it's probably very likely that the molecule exists in some degree. Okay, and then this is just a slide that sort of reviews what some of the molecules that we just looked into. Counting up these carbons is the important part here. So we remember the must-eat peanut butter mnemonic. One carbon is methane. So we should be able to have the students remember some of the words that they just learned. Hexane and octane, these are very logical names, right? Hexane, 6 carbons, octane, 8 carbons. At the bottom here it says, can you make up your own hydrocarbon and think of a name for it? What would a hydrocarbon with 5 carbons be called? Maybe pentane, that would be a cool guess for the kids to make. What about 9 carbons? Nonane. 10 carbons would be decane. So you can look up other hydrocarbons and think of logical names for them. All right, so let's go beyond the carbon chains. Let's look at what's possible out of the nitrogens and the oxygens, which are the other elements that we've mainly been studying here. We saw a little earlier in the lesson, we saw about ammonia. Ammonia is the active ingredient in some kinds of Windex. It's also a very important fertilizer molecule. It's the molecule that supplies plants with nitrogen. So if we need crops to grow, we need to add some kind of nitrogen-containing molecule, perhaps ammonia. We can have 2 nitrogens attached to each other, just like we could have 2 carbons attached to each other to form ethane. This molecule is called hydrazine, N2H4, all right, 2 blue nitrogens connected. This is not a super stable bond though. Unlike the carbon-carbon bonds, those are very stable. Nitrogen-nitrogen bonds are less stable, which is why these are used in rocket fuels. So the picture we have here is of the descent machine that is used to bring rovers to the surface of Mars. And you can see the hydrazine rockets firing here to slow down the rover as it approaches the surface. Hydrogen is very, very famous rocket fuel because that nitrogen-nitrogen bond breaks down into other molecules, and this is the principle of why it can give a rocket a thrust, because we're creating gases from a liquid. We also are obviously very familiar with water. What if we have an oxygen-oxygen bond? This is possible. This molecule is a very famous molecule called hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. And you actually may have some H2O2 in your house as in a solution form, hydrogen peroxide. This is a bleaching agent, it's an oxidizing agent, and it disinfects things. So again, why does it work? Because that oxygen-oxygen bond is much less stable than a carbon-carbon bond. The oxygen-oxygen bond breaks down into something that's called a radical, which we may study in future lessons. But it becomes actually very reactive molecule once that oxygen-oxygen bond breaks. One thing that the reason I'm showing, so this is nice to show the students that there's more diversity here. It's kind of cool to see that the hydrazine kind of is like 2 ammonias linked together, and the peroxide is kind of like 2 waters linked together, which is kind of a cool thing. It's like a double water in a way, just missing the extra hydrogens. The reason that I show this slide is because students have this tendency to, when they're playing with the models, to build these crazy, or even drawing, to build these very elaborate structures that have tons of oxygen-oxygen bonds, tons of nitrogen-nitrogen bonds, single bonds anyway. And these are not possible structures, okay? So I'm going to show you on the next slide here, or in a couple slides, we're going to see some impossible structures. But these are possible. You're not going to really see chains of nitrogens, chains of oxygens much longer than this. So that's just something to keep in mind. These are fine, but when we're looking at this idea of literacy, there's certain kind of combination of letters that are you just don't see them. You don't see 5 J's in a row in a word. So that's what we're going to kind of look at in a minute here. Before we look at that, let's just do some review. Do we know what these simple hydrogen-containing molecules are? Some of them are from before. We can name the hydrogen peroxide, hydrazine. These are the new ones for us. Can you take these sort of groups here, maybe a hydrazine group, a peroxide group? Can you have the students improvise on these, make molecules that have 2 oxygens in a row or 2 single bonded nitrogens in a row? This is just giving them some more practice. So they can build these, they can draw these, everything we should be building also. All right, so this is what I was talking about, the idea of literacy. chains of nitrogens like this, it just doesn't happen, okay? The students may want to build a model that uses up all their oxygens. It just does not happen. It's an impossible situation. It has to do with the electronegativity of the atoms. They're just way too electronegative to be joining up like this, and they don't have this concept of electronegativity yet, but you can just kind of tell them for now, don't bother trying to build these. Spend your time building carbon-carbon bonds. Those molecules are much more likely to exist. What about this molecule? Does this molecule exist? Definitely doesn't exist just because of the 4-3-2-1-0 rule. Fluorines only make one bond. So while the molecules on the top look like they could exist, they really don't practically exist, but the molecule on the bottom definitely doesn't exist because it just is wrong as far as the number of bonds. All right, now here's some kind of applications, some extensions of what we've just been doing. This one we're going to let the students try to draw something, try to build a model based only on the formula. All right, so we're going to build this molecule, C2H6O, which is ethanol. One of those isomers is ethanol, okay? You're going to give them a chance to build it, see what they come up with. Because they know this 4-3-2-1 rule, and because the model kits kind of lend themselves to giving the students the correct answer, you can let them give this a try. If you wanted to try to draw this out, not just build the model, if you want to have them draw it, I try to encourage the students to draw the heavy atoms first, okay, the larger atoms, carbons and oxygens. Get those down into bonds first. Don't try to figure out where the hydrogens go first, because those are kind of going to be kind of encrusting the molecules. So when I have students figure out, and this goes for college organic chemistry class too, have them draw the heavy atoms bonded first when you're trying to figure out what the structure is. All right, there's 2 carbons, there's 1 oxygen, maybe this is how it goes. There's got to be 6 hydrogens, right? So first we need to put the bonds in, right? We know that carbons make 4 bonds, oxygens make 1 bond. And if you do this, you'll get the right answer. There's no other way to really do it once you've set it up this way. That's ethanol. But there is another way of doing it. If you don't kind of give the kids too many hints, you will have them, some of them will do this. Some of them will arrange the heavy atoms this way, COC. This can give you the correct answer too. We know that each carbon needs 4 bonds. Okay? The oxygen doesn't need any more bonds because it already has 2 bonds. And there's plenty of space for the 6 hydrogens that are needed. This is a different molecule. This is called dimethyl ether. And this is an industrial chemical. It's not ethanol. Ethanol, this is the edible ethanol. It's the one that's also in gasoline. The dimethyl ether is a gas. So what we're looking at here is the concept of isomerization, isomers, molecules that have the same formula, right, C2H6O, but have totally different structures and totally different properties. One's a liquid, one's a gas. So this is a really fascinating concept for students to realize that you can take the same atoms, join them up different ways, and get different molecules. So this is a really, really big concept in chemistry. All right, so for their homework or for more learning, you can have them kind of really start to improvise. Use the bonding rules that they learn to just come up with some molecules. Let's just make some molecules up. But you can't make molecules that have tons of oxygen-oxygen bonds, at least single bonds, and you can't have molecules with tons and tons of nitrogen-nitrogen single bonds because, right, they don't really exist. They're not possible to make because they're too unstable. Encourage them to use lots of carbons when they're doing this, okay? So I made up a few of my own, which are real molecules. Not every molecule that they make will be real, but it's possible that it could be real. Let's start with 4 carbons. Let's try to make a molecule here. 4 carbons. Let's add some stuff to it. Let's add a nitrogen and oxygen to each side. Let's make a double bonded oxygen. We're familiar with that too. That's enough. Let's add hydrogens, finish up the molecule, get the correct number of bonds that we need here. That's a cool, creative molecule. The students could definitely do that, learn with the knowledge of that 4-3-2-1 rule, right? Again, we're going to learn what the meaning of that 4-3-2-1 rule is. We're going to see what does that come from later. This molecule turns out to be a real molecule. This is GABA. It's gamma-aminobutyric acid. This molecule is a neurotransmitter. So just kind of building random, I mean, I knew this one was going to be a neurotransmitter, but many of the molecules the students will build will turn out to be real things that have biological meaning to them. Let's do CCO. Let's see what we can do with this. That's the same as the ethanol, right? But let's add an extra double bond. Let's put some more hydrogens on it. Let's do some fluorines for fun. This molecule is tetrafluoroacetic acid. This is a much more acidic version of acetic acid, which is vinegar. So this is something that you might use in a biochemistry lab to do certain processes. We can also have the kids experiment with rings. Definitely, rings are very common in chemistry and biochemistry. Here's a ring. Carbons have to have 4 bonds, nitrogens have to have 3 bonds, so let's add those bonds in. They're seeing the trend here that hydrogens tend to take up those leftover bonding spaces. This is just kind of how molecules work. This is, again, that literacy idea, that's seeing like what are the common trends here. You know, we see in words there tends to be at least that one vowel in the word. Kind of the same thing here. How do chemicals look? They tend to have hydrogens encrusting them, taking up the extra bonding spaces. This molecule is a spice. It's a flavor molecule. It's the pepper spice flavor called piperidine. So we're seeing that with this simple, you know, just a few molecules, knowing that those bonding rules, we can actually come up with. They're not really words, but if you knew the letters of the alphabet, you can make up words. And if you know some of the rules of spelling, you can make up words that may actually exist. You know, it's likely that if you have you know, a vowel, 2 consonants, put it together, it might be a real word. If you know the bonding rules, it's very likely that you could make molecules that are real molecules. So I believe that is the end of lesson 2. Again, they can practice the formulas here. Don't have them worry about the order of the elements too much. There's kind of a custom for what the order of them is. I don't really worry about it. That's something that they will come with time, where they realize carbons tend to be first in these formulas. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed lesson 2, and I look forward to how you're progressing towards lesson 3. Thank you.